Welcome in to the Corner 3, taking you around the arc of college basketball. From the NCAAC to the Pac-12, the WCC to the SWAC. We cover it all now on 93.7 The Ticket. Here is your host, Austin Orman.
That's right. Welcome in another edition of the Corner 3 podcast. Let's see if I can't get this camera squared up a little bit better. There we go. I am your host, Austin Orman. Thank you, as always, for being along for the ride, tuning in to the episode, especially over the 4th of July and the 4th of July weekend. Hopefully you are having fun out at a lake somewhere. Maybe you're grilling out in your backyard, hanging out on your patio, whatever it is you're doing. God bless America. Let's celebrate it. Let's have a fantastic weekend. Thank you for making the Corner 3 a part of your weekend. If you're listening live as this drops, you can be a part of the show, 402-464-5685. Otherwise, please go ahead and drop a comment, drop a line on Twitter at Austin_Orman. You see that if you're watching the video version of the stream releasing on social media and Allo Channel 961 as well. If you're listening to the podcast version, thank you for finding it. Thank you for liking the show. Thank you for subscribing to it, all that good stuff. Doing the best I can to be pretty regular, dropping episodes here on Fridays. Little holiday isn't necessarily going to scare me off. I apologize for no episode last week, I believe it was. I had a wedding rehearsal to get to. One of my best friends got married. Shout out Nick and Sydney. Wishing you absolutely nothing but the best in your married life. Hope you're enjoying your honeymoon as well. I think if you two are listening on your way back from your honeymoon, it's probably about when this episode is getting recorded. Either way, congratulations to my friends Nick and Sid for that. Had a fantastic time at the wedding over the weekend. And if you listen to the ticket during the week, you'll know that I took a couple days off. After that, headed down to Kansas City with my family. But it's great to be back here talking some college basketball with you. A couple things to get here. I think both of these maybe could have been full episodes in and of themselves, but I'm going to smash them into one episode here. First and foremost, what we'll get to is the Nebraska and Nebraska-adjacent players in the NBA draft. How far would a team of those players have gone in the 2024-25 NCAA tournament? Would they have made the tournament? Spoiler alert, yes, I think a team of Nebraska and Nebraska-adjacent players would have done it. They wouldn't have been, bulletproof. They would not have been invincible. But I do think it would have been a pretty darn solid NCAA tournament team. Then in the second segment of the show, of course, in honor of the 4th of July, the red, white, and blue power rankings. Not every team that wears red or white or blue, but some of the top handful of teams that I think are going to be the best teams that have their primary colors as red, white, and blue. We'll go over that in the second segment of the show. Like I said, if you have any quibbles, anything you want to throw my way about how I discuss this upcoming list of Nebraska and Nebraska-adjacent players in the NBA draft and how I think they would have fared in college as a team last year, let me know on Twitter, Austin_Orman. Let's dive into it with the guys that were in or around the NBA draft and kind of professional scene from college basketball last year. Really, I came up with a rotation of 7 guys, Nebraska adjacent. I'll get to the guys that I didn't throw on the list first, just for the sake of simplicity. The guys that I did not include on this team because it's college eligibility, because they're still around, or just because they maybe weren't quite Nebraska adjacent enough for me. So Latrell Wrightsell Jr., obviously a Nebraska guy. He was hurt last year. You have Bengot Dak out at Colorado. Young guy, still has college eligibility. Abdul Bashir was a target for Nebraska. That's an Omaha guy who went the JUCO route out in Casper, Wyoming. He'll be a member of Bruce Pearl's team at Auburn this year. Will Cooper not included. Sam Hoiberg, Cale Jacobson not included. Abdul's brother Abdi not included. Jason Green up at Creighton. Jaden Dawson down at Kansas. And then I'm going to leave Juwan Gary off this team, I think, for the purposes here. Yes, he played at Nebraska, but was never a serious prospect, I think, for the NBA. So I'm going to leave Juwan off my list. That leaves me with really 7 guys. Chucky Hepburn, Hunter Salas, John Tonje, Bryce Williams, Ryan Kalkbrenner, St. Thomas, and Frankie Fiddler. As I tried to build this rotation, right, that I think would play in March, I think at first blush, the 5 best players on that list, Chucky Hepburn, Hunter Salas, John Tonje, Bryce Williams, and Ryan Kalkbrenner. I think if I look at that setup, you have on-ball defense and perimeter defense with Chucky Hepburn and Hunter Salas. I really like how that sets up. You have shooting and scoring with Tonje and with Williams. I think those would be the 2 go-to guys. And then holding down the middle, Ryan Kalkbrenner, 4-time Big East Defensive Player of the Year. I think those are probably the 5 best guys in that lineup. We know that Chucky Hepburn and Hunter Salas can score, but I think on this team, they wouldn't necessarily be asked to. I think they would be able to play a role that they're more comfortable in, a role that they're more suited with. And I really think that a team like this could amplify the strengths of Chucky Hepburn and Hunter Salas. What are those? For Chucky Hepburn, it's facilitation, right? It's making sure the ball moves. It's making the right play late in the shot clock. It's being an on-ball defender, for 70 feet of the court. I really think that Chucky Hepburn would be a great guy to have at the point of attack for this team. Last year at Louisville, averaged 16.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and just under 6 assists per game, to go along with about 2.5 steals per game as well. Shooting numbers weren't that great. 43% from the floor is okay. 33% from 3 is not what you're looking for out of a guy with Chucky's skill set, especially when you see that he shoots 84% from the free throw line. That would tell you there's probably some room for improvement in the jumper for Chucky Hepburn. And it was a little bit of a down year for him from three-point range for his career. Chucky is a 35% three-point shooter. So, within a stone's throw, it's not like it was a terribly down year for him from 3. But, Chucky Hepburn, I think in a lower volume sort of role, would be pretty well suited to be a guy that averages, 8, 9, maybe 10 points per game. And if we can get him shooting, 46, 35 to 36, and then around 80% from the free throw line, that's an incredibly valuable player in the game of college basketball. Hunter Salas last year at Wake Forest, 18 points, 5 rebounds, about 3 assists per game, 1.7 stocks, steals and blocks combined per game. Most of that did come from the steals ends of things. Hunter Salas is just a little bit more offensively limited than Chucky Hepburn. Certainly a more explosive guy, more explosive in transition. I just don't think Hunter Salas is best when he needs to handle the ball, but he's also not necessarily the best player off the ball, right? Hunter Salas is best used offensively as a menace in transition, right? Where he can get downhill with a head of steam going to the rim. His handle certainly improved from where it was at Millard North all the way up to Gonzaga and then out to Winston-Salem playing for Wake Forest. But the jump shot just never came around. You give Hunter Salas credit in the mid-range and at the rim. He shot a 46% from 2 last year and 48% from his career mark from 2. But man, only a 33% career three-point shooter, and that dipped all the way down below 30 to about 28% for Hunter Salas last year. That's a guy that I think we have a lot better on-ball options, right? Chucky Hepburn handling the ball. I think Tonje and Williams are better self-creators than Salas is, and all those guys are better three-point shooters, which is why I'm not 100% sold on Hunter Salas being in the starting lineup for this team. I think he could be a good change of pace guy. I think that if you wanted him to run a second unit, he could do that. But if you're going for defense and tenacious, play aggression on the perimeter, I really do like the pairing of Hepburn and Salas defensively out there. And I think that this team is going to need it because I think John Tonje and Bryce Williams would be the 2 main bucket getters on this team. They combined for 40 points a game last year, and they held their own in rebounding and facilitating. They averaged about 9.3 rebounds per game between the 2 of them and just a shade under 5 assists per game between the 2 of them. But neither one of them is a high-level defender consistently, right? Tonje, relatively athletic, a little stockier, maybe a little sturdier. And then Bryce Williams, right, has the length, has the wingspan to be a solid defender, but wasn't always great on the ball. So I think there's a part of me that wants to play Hepburn and Salas together to give them the toughest perimeter covers, and then Tonje and Williams can look solid or better defensively by not having to guard the other team's best players. But man, that's a lot of shots between the two of them. I think between Tonje and Williams, how are we going to make that work offensively? Because right now, really, we're staring at a 4-guard lineup, I think, ideally, for each of these guys. Maybe you can consider Bryce Williams a wing on this team, but right now, as the starting lineup is constructed, Bryce Williams is playing the 4. And I don't necessarily think that's beneficial for him or for this team when you look at how it needs to be constructed. Now, the 5 being Ryan Kalkbrenner helps, right? Kalkbrenner certainly, holds down the middle defensively, and in terms of rebounds, right? He averaged just under 9 rebounds per game last year. But who's going to help him, right? Chucky Hepburn's a pretty solid rebounder for a smaller guard. Hunter Salas will get involved. Not the most willing rebounder, but he at least corrals them. Tonje and Williams prefer to float on the perimeter instead of getting a body and boxing out if it was up to them. So I think that this team would really struggle with rebounding, especially if there's a big man that can match Kalkbrenner. I think there are some teams that would give this hypothetical team some fits on the interior, just because there's not really a true 4 among this group, right? Not even a stretch 4, not a ball handling 4. There's just really not one, which is why I think when I look at putting this team together, the 2 guys that I would have coming off the bench in St. Thomas and Frankie Fiddler, what they'd be able to do with their size in rebounding the basketball, little bit of positional versatility from them as well, I think that would really go a long way for this team. Not just in helping, Ryan Kalkbrenner clean up the glass, but I think in terms of role distribution, that's what I would be a little bit worried about this team with, right? I think these guys know who they are as players ideally, but a lot of these guys were all asked to be the guy for their teams. Frankie Fiddler, much less so, right, at Michigan State, especially where he settled into by the end of the year. St. Thomas at USC, Swiss Army knife, versatile, do it all. I think he would fill that role on the team. Chucky Hepburn was 1A to Terrence Edward Jr.'s 1B at Louisville, right? Maybe you flip that depending on the game. But Chucky was really the head of the snake for Pat Kelsey in a lot of ways, especially with some of the injuries that team suffered early on. Hunter Salas was the guy at Wake Forest, right? No, it wasn't Cam Hildreth. No, it wasn't a big man. It was Hunter Salas. And I just don't think that's the role that's best for him, but it's one that he got used to playing. Obviously, Tonje was the guy, consensus All-American at Wisconsin, and Bryce Williams, one of the leading scorers in the Big Ten with 20.5 points per game. He was asked to create so much offense at Nebraska that he was good at. He could certainly do it, don't get me wrong. But what role would these guys play on this team? So if we go just by talent, I still think it's Hepburn, Salas, Tonje, Williams, and Kalkbrenner in the starting lineup. I think that's a group with a lot of ball handling. I think that's a really solid perimeter defense. And I do like the shot blocking with Kalkbrenner, even Williams, trailing from the perimeter, coming over from the weak side. I really think this team could be pretty decent as long as it plays an aggressive style defensively. Now, the weaknesses, I really think that 3-point shooting is a weakness for this team. Chucky Hepburn is barely passable, right? Below average 3-point shooter. Hunter Salas had one really good year at Wake Forest and then couldn't back it up. So I'm not sold on him long-term as a 3-point shooter. Obviously, you have Tonje and Williams shooting 39 and 37% from 3 last season, 38 and 38% for their careers as well. Kalkbrenner at 34%, we wouldn't ask him to be a stretch big that much. Anything he could provide in that area would be huge, but that's a guy that shot 34% from 3 on not quite 70 attempts last year and only 31% for his career, and that's a borderline 70% shooter, which tells you that's probably a pretty true gauge of his accuracy. And then the 2 guys that we'd bring off the bench, St. Thomas and Frankie Fiddler. Thomas only a 30% 3-point shooter and 31% for his career. Frankie Fiddler dipped all the way down to 20% from 3 last year, and 33% was his career mark, including his 2 years at Omaha and then the one in East Lansing. Now, maybe for Frankie, a clear idea of who he was as a player, what role he was going to be asked to play at Michigan State would have helped. And Michigan State as a team just did not shoot it well from three last year. So maybe that bogged Frankie Fiddler's numbers down a little bit as well. But as I think through what this team has and what it doesn't have, the way that I think that you create the most well-rounded team is that you send either Hunter Salas or Bryce Williams to the bench, depending on how it is you want to set that team up. And then I think you insert St. Thomas into that starting lineup, right? That's a gritty, elbow grease, positionally versatile player that I think would have a better chance of hanging at the 4 than Williams would. But I think as I look at this team, I would probably move Hunter Salas to the bench. Now, that does put a lot of pressure on Ryan Kalkbrenner, right, to clean up a lot of messes at the rim. Chucky's fine. Tanjay's okay. Williams is fine on the perimeter as well. But I think to have a guy like St. Thomas, who at 6'6", 6'7", can moonlight as a 3, can handle the ball a little bit. He averaged 4 assists per game, which would be the second most on this team behind only Chucky Hepburn. I really like the idea of slotting in St. Thomas as the starting power forward and then bringing Hunter Salas in off the bench, right? I think the lineup for me would be Chucky Hepburn at the 1, John Tanjay at the 2. I'm putting Bryce Williams at the 3, St. Thomas at the 4, and Ryan Kalkbrenner at the 5. Now, the issues that you run into with this lineup is you don't have that definable strength defensively, right? Especially when it comes to the aggression on the perimeter. So you lose a little bit of that, right? Not bad, but not as good as the combo of Hepburn and Salas there. You don't get much better in terms of the three-point shooting, but I think the roles offensively make a lot more sense, right? Chucky will handle the ball. St. Thomas will help facilitate in some matchups as well. You can run some 1-5 pick and roll with Hepburn and Kalkbrenner, some 1-4 with Hepburn and Thomas potentially, have St. Thomas make some plays out of the short roll. And then Tanjay and Williams are, number one, overqualified floor spacers. But I think if you have some pick and roll as the first action, then you set up Tanjay and Williams on the second side of things where you get them into an advantageous one-on-one, or you get them some easy catch and shoot jumpers. That's going to be where the bulk of this offense comes from. You like St. Thomas, you like Kalkbrenner on the offensive glass. Chucky will stick his nose in there a little bit. And I really think that that's the best lineup in terms of players from Nebraska or those that are Nebraska adjacent. You're still really missing a backup center, and there's not a whole lot of that size on this roster to begin with or coming out of the state of Nebraska. So this team would really hope that Ryan Kalkbrenner is A, effective, and B, not in foul trouble. Otherwise, you are looking at, even being in a smaller situation than the 2017-18 Nebraska team with that pseudo lineup of death that they copied from the Golden State Warriors, where you had Isaac Copeland playing the 5 on offense and Isaiah Roby playing the 5 on defense. But at the end of the day, when I look at this lineup of Chucky Hepburn, John Tanjay, Bryce Williams, St. Thomas, and Ryan Kalkbrenner, with the bench of Hunter Salas and Frankie Fiddler, I do think that's an NCAA tournament team. I give that team probably, on the low end and a 75-80% chance of making the NCAA tournament. Now, it would be exposed in the middle, right? There'd be games that Kalkbrenner struggles. You're going to have to find some depth to fill out behind him. But I really do think that this team would make the NCAA tournament. And I think for them, probably the ideal seed for them to make a run would be a 5 or a 6. I really think that's where this team would end up if everything clicked and everything went right for it. I think it's a 5 or a 6. I don't think that it's good enough. I don't think it would have the firepower across the board to challenge for, wearing home in the second round or even the third round of the tournament. But I do think there's enough talent here and enough rotations that make enough sense that this team would at least qualify for the NCAA tournament. Now, why do I say I think that a 5 or a 6 seed would be ideal for this team? I think winning a 5-12 or a 6-11 would give this team some confidence, right? Where they're clearly better, had a better regular season, and they probably have a more definable strength that they can exploit in a matchup like that. And then I do think this team, could take down a 3 seed or a 4 seed in the second round of things. Wouldn't guarantee it, wouldn't bank on it necessarily, but I think it could be at least in the cards. But then I don't think that this is a team that I would take too seriously as a threat for the Final Four. I think depending on matchups and obviously the variability of March, I think this could be a second weekend team. I think it could make an Elite Eight with the right matchups. But then as you go through last year's Elite Eight field, I don't see this team beating more than, one team, maybe with a couple coin flips in there as well. I do like this team over Michigan State. Now, Michigan State rebounded at an insanely high level last year, especially on the offensive glass, and that would give some problems. But I like Hepburn and Salas defensively against what a lot of Michigan State's guards would do. I do think there's pretty good positional size that Michigan State didn't always have. Cohen Carr could be a problem. I just don't think he's that great of a basketball player. I think Kalkbrenner is clearly the best post in that matchup. And then it comes down to, can Tonje and Williams take care of the ball and hit enough shots against a Michigan State team that like to muddy games up, that played an ugly style that I didn't always appreciate, darned if it didn't work for them. But I do think this team would have the best chance of beating Michigan State of any of those teams. I think Tennessee might be a little bit too tough for this team, just the way that they play, the way all of them crash the offensive glass, better positional size. I think Lanier could go off. I think Zakai Ziegler would be pretty good in that matchup as well. So I think it's a coin flip against Tennessee. I'm not sure that this Nebraska team would have the best player in a matchup against Texas Tech. I think JT Toppin and Darian Williams last year would have given this team some fits. So I probably would have taken Texas Tech, probably 60-40 in that matchup. Not the score, right, in terms of the odds, right? I would give a lean to Texas Tech in that one. I think this team could beat Maryland. I think they could hang with them, but there's just a lot of size on that Maryland team. The Crab Five found something. I like Jacoby Gillespie, right? I think offensively he is what Chucky Hepburn is defensively. I think with what Rodney Rice could do as a spot-up shooter, St. Miguel playing his role. And really, I think because of the size, right? I mean, who in that starting lineup are you asking to guard Derek Queen and Julian Reese, right? I probably stick Derek Queen on St. Thomas defensively and then have Julian Reese take the Kalkbrenner matchup. But then, can Derek Queen do what Derek Walker did to Ryan Kalkbrenner? I think that's certainly in the cards, right? I think Reese's height and the fact that he understands who he is as a player at the power forward position, I like him a little bit better in terms of role distribution than I do St. Thomas. So I think that Maryland front court would probably end up winning the game for that team over the Nebraska guys. But you can talk me into and convince me that the Tonje and Williams go off and keep this team in it in terms of scoring. That Chucky Hepburn maybe limits Jacoby Gillespie a little bit, or at least makes it tough for him. But then when you look at the Final Four field, I don't think this Nebraska team, this Nebraska-adjacent team, for clarification's sake, is beating any of the teams that made the Final Four. Duke is just too big across the board. Better defensively, better offensively. I mean, role distribution as well. I think this Duke team handles this Nebraska team relatively comfortably. I think Auburn ends up with the best player in the matchup in Janai Broom. That'd be a fun matchup with him and Kalkbrenner. You can talk me into Auburn being maybe a little too inconsistent, but I think Auburn was better than this Nebraska all-star caliber team. Houston, I think, way out toughs this team. Really good positional size. I think they would make it really tough for this team to move the ball side to side like it would need to against them. And I just don't trust this team holding up for 40 minutes against Houston. And then Florida. Talk about, guys that know their roles, right? I think Walter Clayton overcomes Chucky Hepburn in that matchup. I really like Will Richard and Elijah Martin. I think they're both probably better than Hunter Salas in that role. Houck and Condon, I think, are good. Handlogton coming in off the bench as well. I think Florida's just too big, too versatile, too skilled across the board for this Nebraska team to handle. So depending on what the matchup was, you can talk me into this team making it Nebraska, that is, to the Final Four. but I really think the ceiling is second weekend, depending on how the Sweet 16 matchup shakes out, and then depending on who they draw in the Elite Eight, because so much of it is about matchups, absolutely. I just don't think that this team of guys from Nebraska is matchup proof. And I think their matchup proof lineup or closer to matchup proof lineup gives up that definable skill that you can really ride through a run in March. So I like the Nebraska adjacent team. I don't necessarily love it. I think it could challenge for the second weekend. I think that's a team that should have won a game, maybe two, depending on the seeding in the NCAA tournament. But of course, we'll never know. Just part of the fun exercise. Let's go ahead and take a break right here. When we get back, we'll have our second segment of the show over 4th of July weekend. It will be the red, white, and blue rankings. Which teams donning those colors do I think will be good? Who might take a step back? Which players am I excited about from those teams? We'll give you our patriotic American 4th of July red, white, and blue team power rankings for 2025-26. That's the second segment of the Corner 3.
Empower a child today with the Teammates Mentoring Program. Hope is only a conversation away when you choose to share your talent, time, and heart with a child. Together, you can build a relationship based on strengths and chart a brighter future, 1 week at a time. Find out how you can be a mentor by visiting LincolnTeammates.org. Become what you needed as a kid by joining the Teammates Mentoring Program today.
At Valentino's, we're on a mission for tradition. On every slice, for every bite. Golden baked crust, cooked to perfection every time. Savory sweet sauce that's made from our own secret recipe. Loaded with the perfect amount of fresh toppings and melty mozzarella cheese. It's the tradition that Nebraskans have come to love. From game day to every day. Valentino's. Taste the tradition.
With UBT, you've got total control over your money. Like Doug, who runs his game day tailgate like a well-oiled machine.
I got burgers, brats, chicken, dogs, plus all the fixins'. And with the UBT Go app, I can track my food spending from anywhere.
Pro move.
They don't call me Grill Sergeant for nothing.
No matter your goals, UBT helps you feel good about reaching them. Union Bank and Trust. Member FDIC.
Wall to Wall Wine and Spirits is your place in North Lincoln to go for all your needs in wine, spirits, and beer. They also have a large variety of cigars in their walk-in humidor, and they have a top-notch walk-in, temperature-controlled high-end wine room. Plus, you can enjoy free samples from their tasting bar. There's only one place to go for all your needs for spirits and cigars. That's Wall to Wall Wine and Spirits on North 27th Street in Lincoln.
Life changes, and sometimes that means changing where you call home. Whether you're downsizing, growing your family, relocating, or facing tough times, you shouldn't navigate it alone. I'm Laura Bonta-Bush with Woods Bros Realty, and I'm here to guide you with all your real estate needs. As wife of football coach Bill Bush, I understand the importance of teamwork and making sure you are supported every step of the way with honesty, integrity, and compassion. If you're looking for a game plan to buy or sell your home, text the word HOME to 402-534-1919. That's HOME to 402-534-1919.
Staying healthy and comfortable starts with the air you breathe. If you're noticing more dust, odors, or allergies, it could be time for duct cleaning from Bryant. Pure Air starts with cleaner air ducts. Pair with enhanced filtration and purifications options, and the difference is amazing. When the air you breathe is clean and fresh, your home smells fresher, and your family is healthier. Time for cleaner air in your home? Call Bryant for a free estimate. Bryant Air Conditioning, Heating, Electrical, and Plumbing. 467-1111. Bryant, whatever it takes.
Lincoln's new craft cocktail lounge is Bar 48 in Lincoln. Located at 2639 North 48th Street, Bar 48 offers everything from cocktails to beer to wine and so much more. With summer right around the corner, you can always enjoy Bar 48's frozen beverages. Follow them on Facebook to stay up to date on their live music performances every Saturday night. Make plans to visit Bar 48 on North 48th Street in the heart of the University Place neighborhood today.
Back to the Corner 3 on 93.7 The Ticket. Here is your host, Austin Orman.
Rolling right along here on the Corner 3 podcast. Austin Orman with you. Hope you're having a wonderful, wonderful 4th of July or 4th of July weekend. whenever it is you're listening to the podcast. In honor of the red, white, and blue, we are going to go through the top teams in college basketball for 2025-26 wearing that color scheme. Now, this is not red and white and blue. Teams that qualify for this ranking use all three of those colors in a prominent way. It is a three-color scheme, not just, they have a home white with a little red or a little blue. If you're just red and white, if you're just blue and white, it doesn't count. You got to be red, white, and blue. Now, not necessarily in that order. I would say, as I think of most of these teams on my list, red is probably secondary behind blue for most of them, and it's not just, a royal blue. Navy counts as well in this exercise. But let's just go through the list of teams, not necessarily ranking them in order, 1 through, I think ended up with 7 of them, 8 of them, 8 teams here, but just kind of looking at the tiers. So going from bottom up, SMU and Liberty, I think, are in that bottom tier of the upper tier of blue teams. Maybe you consider SMU a little more red than blue, but I think SMU getting Boopy Miller back is going to be huge. That's their leading scorer. I don't know if I think that they're an NCAA tournament team in year 2 under Andy Enfield. They'll be fine generally. They'll probably win, 17, 18, 19 games if I had to guess. But I don't think SMU is going to be anything special necessarily in year 2 in the ACC. Now, Liberty and Conference USA, I do think will be pretty legit. They've got a lot going for them. Might have the best backcourt in Conference USA. Colin Porter will be a fourth-year starting point guard for them. Shot over 40% from 3 last year. Caden Matheny made his decision to return to Liberty. That's going to be pretty big for them. I think the biggest player, the key player for them, Isaiah Innen. He suffered an injury last year, was out for the year. But he was really good for Liberty when he was on the court. He'll be an older guy, right? 7th year of college basketball for him. But that's a guy who, before he went down with the injury, was averaging about 10.5 points, 4.5 rebounds per game, and shooting just under 40% from 3. So I think he's really the swing guy for Liberty. He comes back healthy and playing well. I think Liberty could be the class of Conference USA again today or this season. So I'm really curious to see Liberty. If they win Conference USA, obviously they're in the tournament, right? Have to win the conference tournament. I don't think they'll be so good as to snag an at-large bid, but I do think that Liberty is going to be a pain in the butt for teams to play. I think they'll be really good, really solid in 2025-26. Moving up from there, teams that I'm pretty sure will qualify for the NCAA tournament, St. Mary's and Ole Miss, both tournament teams last year. When I look at what St. Mary's is rolling with in 2025-26, they're rolling without Goose Marshallonis. That's going to be a huge loss for them. But you think about year 2, Mikey Lewis, who gave Nebraska a lot of fits up at the Sanford Pentagon, was really impressed with what he was able to do. Harry Wessels as a backup big is going to be fun, I think, in another season for them. But really the biggest return for them is Paulius Morauskas, who was a stud for the Gales last year. Of course, he began his career at Arizona last year, second team All-District according to the NABC. He was the West Coast Newcomer of the Year, first team All-West Coast Conference player as well. He finished second in scoring for St. Mary's, 12 points a game, second in rebounding, about 7.5 as well. Also had 13 double-doubles. 5 of them in his first 6 games at St. Mary's in Moraga, California. So I think Paulius Morauskas takes another step forward. He's undisputably the best player on this St. Mary's team. I think Mikey Lewis comes in second, but I do think that you'll see in the early going, they miss Augustus Marshallonis. On the other hand, when you look at Ole Miss, this roster, not necessarily my favorite, but there are certainly some interesting pieces on it. What's going to hurt them is losing Matt Morrell, who was so good for them last year. You lose Jamin Brakefield off the roster, who really came into his own in Oxford after transferring over from Duke. But if you look, Malik Dia is in. He transferred from Belmont. Keza Giffa, former High Point players, a name people I think is going to need to know. 6'1" guard, good scorer out of France. Then you look at Travis Perry transferring in from Kentucky. That's a guy a lot of Wildcat fans were high on. Thought he was going to be Reed Shepherd 2.0, didn't develop into that in his first year. I think that's a really good get for Chris Beard and his staff. And then the intriguing addition of AJ Storr, who kind of bounced around in the transfer portal a little bit. I don't know if I fully understand the fit with AJ Storr and Ole Miss. I think his reputation probably exceeds his game at this point, but he's going to have a lot to prove coming off the year that he really didn't have at Kansas. He was not as advertised for that team that I think underperformed last year. So maybe you get a motivated AJ Storr that comes in with something to prove, and he's a borderline all-SEC caliber player. I think that goes a long way for them. You also had James Scott from Louisville. I think that goes a long way for a team in Ole Miss that doesn't have a lot of size on the roster right now, right? You look at Malik Dia at 6'9", Corey Chest, the transfer from LSU, is listed at 6'8". Nico Bandalo out of Canton, he was a prolific prep player as well. And then James Scott at 6'10". That's the majority of the size for Ole Miss. Not a huge team necessarily, and I'm curious to see if Chris Beard keeps leaning into the offensive identity he found last year instead of the aggressive defensive identity that really made him who he was early in his career. We're halfway through the red, white, and blue rankings. SMU, Liberty, bubbly, or for Liberty, it'd be they have to win the Conference USA tournament to make the NCAA tournament. St. Mary's and Ole Miss, I think, will have a shot to be in the at-large conversation. Teams I feel pretty good about making the NCAA tournament: Arizona and Gonzaga. We'll start with Gonzaga because I think that they're going to be, once again, the class of the West Coast Conference. It really helps when you get Graham Ike back. Braden Huff as well. He started all 3 games in the postseason, averaged about 16 points and 5 rebounds in 30 minutes per game. That's a really solid front line with not a lot of overlap, right? Huff can stretch the floor a little bit. Ike is going to be the one that holds down the interior. I like how that sets up for Gonzaga. Guards are going to be a little bit different. Braden Smith takes over. No, not the Purdue point guard, but with Nemhard graduating, Braden Smith, after he redshirted last year, transferring from Colgate, looks like he'll be the starting point guard for Mark Few. Adam Miller, transfer from Arizona State, shot the cover off the ball last year, shooting 43% from 3. They need that, Gonzaga does. They shot one of their lowest percentages from 3 in the Mark Few era. Now, it was pretty good. I mean, 35% is nothing to sneeze at, but only 21 attempts per game was sub 250th in the country as well. I think Adam Miller, what he's able to do on the perimeter shooting the basketball is going to be a massive upgrade for the Zags. And maybe the most intriguing player on that team, Tyon Grant-Foster. Not sure exactly how he's still around playing college basketball. He will be a 7th-year player as long as he gets his waiver from the NCAA. I mean, 20 points, 6 rebounds, steal and a half, and block and a half per game with Grand Canyon in 23-24. Been banged up at times throughout his college career. He's bounced around the country pretty much all over the place at this point. If Gonzaga is able to secure Tyon Grant-Foster a 7th year of eligibility and they can keep him healthy, he is probably my pick for WCC Player of the Year. There will be competition, right, between him and probably Paulius Morauskas, I would say. But I think getting Tyon Grant-Foster is huge for Gonzaga as long as, like I said, he's going to be eligible. Gonzaga is decently deep as well. Davis Fogel coming in, number 35 player in the 2025 class out of Washington. If Steele Venters is healthy, that's a pretty darn solid top 7 for Gonzaga with some backup size on the bench in Ismaila Dianya and then Parker Jefferson, former Minnesota commit. Not much to write home about for those two guys, but I think Gonzaga can comfortably go 7 deep, probably play a couple big men in there as well. Gonzaga is going to be good. The flip side of that is Arizona. How do they compete in the Big 12? And I put some emphasis on how do they compete, because I think Koa Pete has been a stud. Maybe a bit of an early bloomer. He's going to have to adjust his game a little bit to college basketball, but that's a consensus top 10 guy in the class who's playing pretty well for Team USA, the U19 World Cup. I'm really high on Koa Pete. You look at Dwayne Aristode, who comes into Arizona wearing number 2. He should be good. Anthony Del Orso with another year should be pretty solid as well. Tobe Awaka. I think it's Awaka, right? Or is it Akawa? I mean, I got to zoom in here a little bit. It was Awaka. I was right the first time. I got to trust myself. The harm for Arizona is they lose Henri Visar to North Carolina, which is a blow to them in their front court depth. But I think if you look at Awaka and Pete together, I think Awaka can provide the muscle, Pete a little bit more of the skill, but that's a big-bodied guy. Arizona last year, 20 wins, double-digit losses. I would project them for probably about the same. I don't think they're going to win the Big 12. They'll probably be in the conversation early, but I have them behind another team we'll talk about here that wears red, white, and blue just because of the caliber of addition that they had. I would say Iowa State is probably going to be better. Houston, I have a lot of confidence, a lot of trust in. Baylor, I think, is in kind of the same range as Arizona, and then we'll see who else pops up throughout the Big 12. The other teams, though, that I think that wear red, white, and blue that are going to be the scariest for college basketball in 2025-26, probably, not a bunch of surprise. It's Kansas and it's UConn. We'll start with the Jayhawks. They get, a top 3 player in the 25 recruiting class in Darren Peterson. That's a guy with good positional size, maybe a little bit of a loose handle, but that's a good scorer, pretty tough nose defensively as well. Some people are projecting that he goes number 1 in the 2026 NBA draft ahead of even AJ DeBansa. I think Darren Peterson's a stud. I think he walks in as a starter from day one. Backing him up, Melvin Council Jr. as a transfer coming in. That's a guy that's seen a lot in college basketball, pretty versatile skill set. Jaden Dawson got a pretty good bag from Kansas, right? That's a Nebraska guy I mentioned at the start of the show. Played some earlier college ball at Loyola Chicago. Curious to see if he steps into the starting lineup as the primary ball handler, or maybe if that's Melvin Council Jr. I think Dawson's going to be a Chucky Hepburn-ish role guy for Kansas. I get why they went and got him. Can he continue to shoot the ball from 3? We'll have to see. Elmarco Jackson, what does year 2 hold for him in Kansas? Talented guy. Will he put it all together? Trey White transferring in from Illinois is big. Keeping Flory Badunga, I think, is really big. He said he wanted to stick around. I think he dabbled with the transfer portal, but is back at Kansas. I think that's huge for them. And then Bryson Tiller as well. That's a name that I think a lot of people have heard of, right? Former top 50 guy. He reclassed up and then did make it to Kansas for the last part of last season. So what does he do with now a half a season of experience and in a redshirt year under his belt? Is he able to start? Is he a guy that comes off the bench and Kansas may be asked to play, not necessarily smaller, but maybe a more guard and forward heavy lineup? Certainly would be good for Kansas after they ended up playing 3 bigs at times late last season, right? Hunter Dickinson, who, thank you, is finally out of eligibility. I think that's good for the sport of college basketball. KJ Adams, extremely limited player, good in his role, but not the best fit for what Kansas was being asked to do. And then Flory Badunga, Bill Self tried all 3 of those players on the floor at one time last year. I think this is a much more perimeter-oriented team, especially behind Peterson, Council, and Dawson. And I think that's going to go a long way to freeing up space in the interior for Badunga to be that vertical kind of lob threat that Kansas didn't use all that often last year. Kansas is going to be good. I don't think I picked them to dethrone Houston in the Big 12 quite yet, but I do think it's going to be a step toward normalcy for Kansas. I think that's a low to mid 20s win program in the regular season. But my pick for the number 1 red, white, and blue team is going to have to be UConn. Good year for UConn coming off back-to-back natties. Not a great year. Not the year that they'd been used to. But I think if you look at this UConn presumed starting lineup, Solomon Ball, Jalen Stewart, Terrace Reed, Alex Caravan, and probably Silas DeMary Jr. Woo, that's pretty darn good. And then you go to the bench, Jacob Furphy, who's tearing it up for Australia in the World Cup. He's had some really good games. You had Braylon Mullins from Indiana, who had Indiana and Kansas interest, 6'5" sniper, kind of in the Liam McNeely role. Eric Ryby from Germany, also having a pretty good World Cup. That's a true 7-footer at 230 pounds walking on campus. And that's before we even get to Malachi Smith, who is an all-conference caliber player for a really solid Dayton team these last couple of years. I think UConn's going to be pretty clearly the best team wearing red, white, and blue again this year. I think they have front court depth. I think they have back court depth. They have more shooting, I think, this year than they did a year ago. I think Alex Caravan returning is going to be big for them in terms of the leadership perspective. Terrace Reed was a lot better as a junior than I thought he was going to be going to UConn. I was kind of puzzled by that addition, but he found a role and played it pretty well for him. I'm pretty high on Jalen Stewart as well. Solo ball, going to be solid like he has been for the last couple of years. We'll see if there's another step up for him or if he just kind of settles into the rotation. But I think the Silas DeMary add as a 40% three-point shooter is huge. I think Furphy is a freshman All-American when he gets to campus. And I really think that Malachi Smith is going to be an underrated, impactful addition. Kind of what UConn was going for last year in Aiden Mahaney that they just didn't get. I really think Malachi Smith is going to be a much better ad for UConn than Aiden Mahaney was. And I was high on Mahaney, right? I've said that multiple times on this very podcast, and I swung and missed on that one. I really think Dan Hurley got a better fit, a better role guy in Malachi Smith than he had in Aiden Mahaney. So as I look at the top red, white, and blue teams, UConn and Kansas, I think you're going to challenge for their conference titles. Gonzaga is going to Gonzaga. I don't think they're going to be a huge player on the national scene, but they'll run the West Coast Conference again. Arizona will be an upper half to upper third of the Big 12 team. Ole Miss and St. Mary's ought to make the NCAA tournament as at-larges. And then for Liberty and SMU, Liberty, it's going to come down to winning the conference. I think that they'll be a really solid Conference USA team. And SMU, I think, is going to be middle in the pack of the ACC in year 2 in that conference for them. That's kind of how I see the red, white, and blue rankings here on 4th of July weekend. I'm going to get out of here. We're going to call it a podcast here after just 2 segments. Really do appreciate you listening. Whether you're sitting at the lake listening to it on your back patio, you're driving somewhere to be with family and friends, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for making the Corner 3 a part of your 4th of July weekend. We'll pop up the red, white, and blue TC3 banner. We'll be out of here. This is Austin Norman signing off. We'll do it again soon.